Well, I'm going to tell you first off that this is not my comfort zone. I was not yet born when my grandfather was governor, as I'm sure you can tell. Since I never had the opportunity to meet my grandfather, he was always that larger-than-life character, that person who I'd heard stories from people, and that's one of the many blessings that I have, is that people are always willing to tell me stories and their experiences of my grandfather. It's wonderful. But I didn't know him. I know the type of person he was and the things he did from, again, stories, history books. But more importantly, those things did tell me that it gave me insight on the type of person he was as far as his core beliefs. And can you imagine coming into Arkansas at that time? The climate, not only with the obvious barriers of wealth and whatnot, but the racial climate, and to think, I think I can do something here. I'm from New York, they'll relate to me. Probably not. Service, empathy, duty, hard work. These are all attributes of my grandfather. As you know, it's the 45th anniversary of the foundation. I have the benefit of serving on that board. My time on the board has given me the opportunity to travel around the state, meet lots of people that do the work every day to make Arkansas a better place. Now, I know that sounds very vague, generic. Let me clarify. People that day in and day out spend their time and their energy lifting people up in areas of poverty, economic stability, education. People that have spent their days helping communities become more prosperous. I've met people that spend their time helping students succeed and achieve. I've had the benefit of meeting business leaders who work statewide, as well as in their communities, to build stronger economic foundations. When I think about this, I can't help but think about my grandfather. It's been nearly 5 decades since his time in Arkansas, and I look at the progress that's been made in our state. Many great strides have occurred. Since we're talking about the foundation, they've made many great strides. Initiatives such as Campaign for Grade Level Reading, Forward Arkansas, Moving the Needle, all to help raise Arkansas up. I look back on the things that were important to him and the various endeavors that he began and worked on, and I think about the principles and beliefs that drove him. He was a man that took his own path. I'd like to think I'm that man, but we'll see. Growing up, he was different from his 4 brothers and didn't quite follow the path that was set for him. He was definitely a hands-on learner, something that I can say I was passed down from generation to generation. You know, it's one thing to read a story. It's one thing to hear from another person and their experiences. It's an entirely different thing to know firsthand about something that you want to enjoy or do. This was my grandfather. He definitely was not one to follow the beaten path. He struck his own road, and I think that was good. He didn't want to know what it was like to work in an oil field, having come from a family based in oil. He needed to know firsthand, and hard work was not a problem that he had anything with. So he went to Texas and became a roughneck in an oil field. It was one of the happiest times of his life. And I cannot say that I've worked as a roughneck in an oil field, but I know that personally, the things that I've done with myself or with others on the ground, being involved, are the things that give me the greatest happiness. After working in oil fields, he worked in a branch of Standard Oil in Europe and the Middle East, Northern Africa, and it allowed him to see a lot of the hardships people had to deal with in another part of the world. He saw many of the injustices and cruelty inflicted upon people by various dictators and rulers at the time, and he saw the poverty and hardships that people day in and day out lived with, and he couldn't quite grasp why that was the way it was. So, logically or illogically, joining the army was the next best thing. And this was right before World War II, about 10 months. Most of his brothers were serving in the military, non-combat positions, but he thought he had to do a little more, so he went and served in the South Pacific in combat and left the military. And I tell you these things because it was the foundation for his sense of service, his sense of duty. You know, growing up, I'm going to tell you a little story about myself. Growing up in the family that I'm from, it's very difficult sometimes to be able to relate to people. And it was the same with my grandfather, and I know my father used to tell me he wanted nothing more than to fit in. Growing up, my father wanted me to be grounded. He wanted me to understand that that name was not who I am, that who I am, it would be determined by the things that I did. So it was very important that we were involved in community and service, and that we were able to see not everybody lived like I did. Just as my grandfather and his mother used to show them, everybody doesn't live like you do. But that doesn't mean that you can't understand or have empathy for the things that they encounter and the things that they endure. One example, and granted this is small in comparison, but angel trees, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the angel tree. If not, it's adopting a family at Christmas. I'm 43 years old, so this was 30 years ago. There used to be a development in Little Rock called Highland Park on 12th Street. Basically when it got dark, police department wouldn't go into Highland Park. We adopted a family. We would usually adopt 3 or 4, and it was up to myself and my sisters to go with my parents. We picked out the toys, the presents. We were responsible for wrapping them and getting them all together. And we were also responsible for taking them to those families. And I remember the first time, it was very difficult for me to understand what I was actually doing. And I mentioned Highland Park because, as I said, the police department wouldn't go into Highland Park. Our family, the first family we delivered one year, was in Highland Park. And we went to Highland Park and delivered it, and it was the first time that I had actually seen that people don't live like I did. But at the same time, they were very proud. They were very happy people that didn't quite have everything that they wanted, that we were able to help. And I understood that was important. If we could, we should. I remember my grandfather used to tell my father, with greater wealth comes greater responsibility. Now granted, as a 12 or 13-year-old, I have no idea what that means. However, looking back, I understand. And it was one thing that really stuck out to me. And I looking throughout this process, have thought about what it would mean for me, equity. How can I equate with equity? Lots of people would say, I can't. However, I know what it means to being on a level playing field. And these experiences were one of the things that taught me that at an early age. Many people see my grandfather as a game changer, and in the state of Arkansas, I would agree he was. He was not like most people in Arkansas, and he was not one that most people could relate to. It's easy to see the issues that might arise trying to relate to anyone in Arkansas coming from the family he did, and I believe his wealth was used against him in every election that he was ever involved in. It was irrelevant to him. He didn't see his wealth as a barrier, but more as a tool to help people and to help the state of Arkansas. Again, what a shock it must have been to come to this state. I don't know if anybody ever told him, hey, you can't do this, or you shouldn't do that, because if that was the case, he probably his track record shows he didn't really listen. He was not raised in the South, and therefore he was not a victim of the pressures and the culture of the South. It didn't matter to him. He saw everybody the same way. Looking back at the life of my grandfather, I'm struck with a sense of amazement and wonder. I say that because I can imagine the task before him and the courage it must have taken to do the things that he did at the time he did, with the beliefs and values that went against the status quo. I find it ironic that the issues at the forefront of our society today are very similar to those that he faced. So I ask, how do we bring those values and beliefs that he felt to today? There are many times that I've thought about this and have said, can you imagine the courage it must have taken? And I wish that if that time came, that I would have that courage. I can't imagine that with the support of everyone in Arkansas and the backing and strength of the WR Foundation, the next 50 years could be ones that the governors will be proud of. Thank you.